So New Year is supposed to be a time of celebration. But on Bourbon Street in the French Quarter in the early morning hours of 2025, there was terror instead. We're going to talk about that and more on this episode of Charle Crimebuster. It is what some people are calling it the fastest minutes in podcasting.
The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are solely those of the individuals interviewed or participating and do not represent those of city, county, state, or federal law enforcement agencies, nor sponsors and platforms of this presentation. Charle Crimebuster, CharleCrimebuster.com, and PeacemakerNetwork.com are copyrights owned by Charle Crimebuster. All individuals described or mentioned in the presentation should be considered innocent until found guilty in a court of law. This presentation contains subject matter such as violence and graphic descriptions which may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
Well, hello and welcome to this edition of Charle Crimebuster. This is our first episode in the new year. And sadly to say, we're going to be reporting today on something that took place on New Year's Day that brought a lot of sadness to a lot of families. But first, let's take a moment to welcome you to the program. If you're a first-time listener, we want to encourage you to reach out with a shout-out. You can reach me, Charle Crimebuster, at gmail.com. That's charlecrimebuster at gmail.com. Hey, you can ask questions. You can make suggestions about the kind of episodes you'd like to hear this year. You can also even lodge objections. If you hear something you don't like, something you don't agree with, feel free to reach out with that shout-out. It is a safe space. Hey, if you just want to reach out and say hi, go ahead and do it. We'd love to hear from you. Also, we'd like to invite you to help us by supporting PeacemakerNetwork.com. Go right on over there today, and you can read about these brave folks who run toward danger instead of away from danger. And in our story today, there were those brave folks that ran toward danger. We're talking about law enforcement. 2 of them were shot in their own courageous ways of responding to this threat. You hear all about that in today's program. But if you'd like to know how you can help these brave people, the military, the first responders, and law enforcement, go to PeacemakerNetwork.com. Hey, you can become a badge supporter. Yep, for as little as $3 a month, you can help us help those that run toward danger. Also, it'll be a support to the program. Let me also invite you to join with us in all the other episodes that we've already released this past year. If you are a crime junkie, then crimebuster.com is the place for you to go. There are all sorts of episodes there. We'd love for you to get acquainted with them. And don't forget to also join us on YouTube. Every week, James Buckland and I, we talk about the episode that we just dropped previous. And we're going to be talking about this episode today. We'll add a few things to that episode that you would not hear in the podcast itself. So join us at YouTube, youtube.com/charlecrimebuster.com. You can find us right there. All right, let's get right into our program. In the early morning hours of 2025, an Army veteran identified as Shamsuddin Jabbar, 43 years of age, according to authorities, and they say he was quote-unquote hell-bent on killing as many as possible. On those early morning hours, he drove a pickup truck around a parked police car that had been placed there as a barricade, and then he plowed into the crowds of people that were celebrating the brand new year. As of now, we know that he killed 14 people, injured dozens of others. Reports then tell us that as he was going down Bourbon Street there in Louisiana, he hit a crane that was parked in the roadway. He then got out of that wrecked pickup, armed with an assault rifle, opened fire on police officers. He was also armed with a handgun. We now know that 2 police officers were shot, charging into the scene to take him down. But the officers, well, they did their job. They shot and killed Jabbar, who, by the way, was a U.S. citizen from Texas. So, my friend, on the early hours of New Year's in 2025, terror did indeed reign on Bourbon Street. Now, as we get into this gripping, brazen shooting that now has been labeled as a terror attack, please note he had an ISIS flag on his truck. He had pledged his loyalty to ISIS. Let's talk a little bit about the place of the target of this terrorist. Well, first of all, you may think, as many do, that, well, a street named after an alcoholic drink, well, it was Bourbon Street. Well, there is a whole lot of drinking going on there, so you might think that that's why they call it Bourbon Street. And my friend, while you may think that, you would be incorrect. Actually, it's a French name, right? A French name. It's a historic street in the heart of the French Quarter of New Orleans. Extends about 12 blocks from Canal Street on, and it is famous for a lot of bars, a lot of street clubs, a lot of partying. Millions of people in 2017, the census said 17.74 million people visited New Orleans there on Bourbon Street. It is indeed a main tourist attraction. And those numbers, well, they actually have grown after Hurricane Katrina in 2005. And, of course, the city, they've built back their tourist base, and millions of people each year, well, Bourbon Street, it does provide quite a bit of insight into New Orleans' rich culture history. You see, it was the French that claimed Louisiana in the 1690s. New Orleans was founded in 1718, and in 1721, a royal engineer designed the city's streets layout. Those streets, by the way, were named after French royal houses and Catholic saints. And this street that we're talking about is called Bourbon. And it's actually named after France's ruling family, the House of Bourbon. Well, now, if you know your world's history, New Orleans then kind of got transferred over to Spain after the 7 Years' War. So the French Quarter also displays not only French culture, but a Spanish influence as well. And so it is rich with history and culture. Now, New Orleans depends on Bourbon Street as a main tourist attraction. I've actually been there a few times myself, one time when I was participating in a conference. And of course, while I did go down Bourbon Street and listen to some great music, I even visited the military museum there in New Orleans. Absolutely a must if you go there. But my friend, I did not stay way into the morning as I strode Bourbon Street, but actually went back to my motel at kind of a decent hour, was up early for breakfast. However, there was one thing that stood out to me even then a few years ago. That was how many people were leaving Bourbon Street as I was beginning my day, and they were just ending their day. In other words, I know that Bourbon Street is crowded at 3 a.m., and especially on New Year's Day. And apparently this killer did as well, because he timed his brazen slaughter of human beings for 3 a.m. in the morning, and on New Year's Day at that. Now, my friend, while Bourbon Street is a place to party, it is also, as I have said, rich in history and culture. And I got to tell you, some of the greatest people in the world live there. It was and is a tourist draw, and that was his target. And he hit it hard, and now 14 people are dead. And as we say here at Charle Crime Train, we cannot forget that these crimes hurt and harm real people. Now the victims, a lot of them were young people, their whole lives ahead of them. There were some older, they will be missed just as much. All out there to celebrate New Year's, having fun, enjoying life. And little did they know that the first day of the new year would be their last day in life as they knew it. It has even impacted people from other countries. At least one we know was the stepson of a lady who was a nanny for the King of England, and she was very close to the king's family. This terror, though maybe it was not intended, it even reached out to royalty itself. One was a former Princeton University football player from New York City. He was down for a weekend of fun with friends from college. They had planned a weekend of hunting and fishing. Another was attending the University of Alabama. Another one from the Auburn University. He had attended the Alabama Christian Academy in Montgomery, Alabama. One was just 18 years of age. Her mother says she was excited to attend nursing school later this year. And her mom also sadly told others she begged her daughter not to go to Bourbon Street like she had in previous years. Another was a mother who left behind a 4-year-old son. She would sometimes bring her son to work and teach him to read. One was father of 2, described his life of the party. Another was a former Princeton University football player from New York City. Yep, lots of college students in town this week. At least it was a target for this terrible killer. You see, this appeared to be another part of his diabolical plan to make a political statement, because it was the morning of the championship Sugar Bowl, and his terror even caused this national event a delay of a day before it was played. Yes, this cowardly act of terror leaves behind more families, even more families, filled with tears. Parents, children, spouses, partners, fathers, and mothers, all beginning the new year grieving the loss of their loved ones, wishing that they had one more day, one more year, one more lifetime. So as we begin this new year, let's do not forget to remember these dear people who will begin this year with sorrow and sadness instead of joy and anticipation. We must never forget that when we cover these type of stories, there are always hurting people left in the aftermath. So let's talk a little bit now about the guy who caused all this terrible tragedy. His name, Shamsuddin Jabbar, 42 years of age. He rented a truck, rammed it into the crowd celebrating New Year's in this tourist district, killed at least 14, injured dozens of more before he was shot dead in a gunfight with law enforcement. An Islamic State flag was recovered from the truck. He also carried weapons, had these explosive devices with him at the time. The FBI has told us that Jabbar, a U.S. citizen, was born in Texas, that he had actually posted videos on social media shortly before the attack. He said in those videos that he was inspired by ISIS, and he decided to attempt this killing in New Orleans after initially had planned to harm his own family and friends. However, he decided to take a more public route to show his own loyalty to ISIS. We do know this in studying him, that he had grown, well, according to others, increasingly withdrawn and more devout in his Muslim faith. That's according to family and friends. Here's what his own brother said about him. Jabbar's brother, Jabbar, told the New York Times that he had last spoken to his brother, well, around 2 weeks ago. And he, of course, said that he never mentioned anything about New Orleans or any intention of carrying out any attack. He went on to say that they were brought up Christian, but that Jabbar converted to Islam long ago. He went on to say, quote, "As far as I know, he was a Muslim for most of his life." That's what Jabbar told the New York Times. He went on to say that what he did really doesn't represent this religion. We all know there are a lot of great Muslim people who are peace and good, loving people. But this guy, he went off the rail, as you might say. Now, he had some problems. He was twice divorced, according to court records. In fact, in 2020, a judge, during his second divorce, he granted Jabbar's wife a restraining order. And Jabbar himself, he wrote about severe financial difficulties. That was even though he was holding a $120,000 a year job. Dwayne Marsh, who's actually married to Jabbar's ex-wife, he told the New York Times that, he had been acting increasingly erratic in recent months. It even calls Marsh and his wife to stop allowing the 2 daughters that she shared with Jabbar to see him. Marsh actually told the outlet that Jabbar was being all crazy, cutting his hair after converting to Islam. That's according to the New York Times. Now, Jabbar Street, where he lived, as well as the surrounding area, it does have a large Muslim and Middle Eastern presence. Houston itself, Well, it has the largest Muslim population in Texas and also in the southern United States. Now, we've also heard from the neighbors and friends who all say they were shocked about the actions of Jabbar. You know, my friends, somebody has said a long time ago, we all live three lives. One is the life we live that those about us see. This would include neighbors and acquaintances. Then there's another life that we live with those who are closest to us. And we can see right away that the life the neighbor sees and the life that our loved one sees, well, in this situation, we can see that they are often different. Because of his two wives, get this, both of them, two of them, even his second wife, filed restraining orders against him. This tells us that he had problems all along. He just didn't suddenly snap and do this. So there are, again, three people that we are. The person that those about us know, the person that those closest to us know, then there is the person that we know ourselves, our inner being. And here he was, Jabbar. He was a confused man. He had financial trouble. He had relationship trouble. And I suggest to you, my friend, that he was ripe for the picking of being brainwashed by ISIS. He was a Muslim, and while most Muslims are peace-loving people, there is a portion of those extremists of the Muslim faith, folks, it's just a fact, they hate America. They see America as the enemy. They see us as the devil, and they have vowed to destroy us. This was evident during 9/11, and it's evident in this terrible, terrible tragedy on New Year's Day on Bourbon Street. The dark side. This was the one who was recruited to the dark side. Along with our propaganda, they pushed him over the edge to do this dark, cowardly deed and to justify it to himself as a radical Muslim, hell-bent on destruction and the carnage of innocent people. Now, one of Jabbar's own relatives, who did not wish to be identified, he said that I don't think he did this of his own free will. I could never see him doing that. Well, maybe he just went crazy. My friend, it wasn't that he went crazy. It was that he was recruited by ISIS to do this terrible, terrible deed. Now we're going to tell you a little more about that, but first it's time to take a little break and to have a little moment to pause and take a deep breath. And we always introduce in these dark things that we share from time to time, we always introduce something to cause us to pause and take a breath. It is now time for Charle Crimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. Well, our first crazy crook of 2025, he's a guy by the name of Dennis Hawkins. He's a 48-year-old man who tried to rob a bank in Pittsburgh. But I guess Hawkins, he just probably didn't get the memo about needing a good disguise that can quickly blend into the crowd after the crime. You see, he chose a woman's blonde wig. He even had fake breasts, right down to the clown pants. But in his failed attempt to pretend to be a woman, he didn't even take time to shave his facial hair. And if the man wasn't noticeable enough, he drew more attention to himself when he attempted to steal a car from a nearby gas station. That attendant called the police, and the police, well, they didn't have to look very far to see a man with a blonde wig on, with fake breasts on, and a bearded face. And so they caught him pretty soon thereafter. So this man, who decided to disguise himself and rob a bank, but forgot to take his facial hair off because he disguised himself as a woman, this, my friend, indeed, is Charle Crimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. Now, there were some very crazy things about this particular crime at the very beginning. There was a spokesman that came out. First of all, the superintendent said it was a terrorist act. Then the FBI said, no, it wasn't a terrorist act. Then the superintendent said he had accomplice. Then the FBI said, no, he didn't have accomplice. But it was, my friend, regardless of what they said at the beginning, it is now very much proven that it was a terrorist act. There were 5 videos posted on Jabbar's Facebook account before the attack. In the first video, he said that he originally planned to harm his family and friends, but he was concerned then that the news headlines would not focus on what he called the war between the believers and the disbelievers. You and I, my friend, are the disbelievers in that war. He stated that he had joined ISIS before this summer. He also provided a will and testament. And the FBI says these words about this attack. Now they're saying, let us be very clear about this point. This was an act of terrorism. It was premeditated and an evil act. This man that turned terrorist was an Army veteran. Now, my friend, this is not to disparage those that are in the military. Just like there are rogue cops, crooked congressmen, and quack doctors, there are from time to time people in the military that also go over to the dark side. And Jabbar was a part of the military. He enlisted in the Army in 2007. This was at the height of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. More than 100,000 U.S. troops had deployed to war zones in the Army. His specialty was human resource. He was a human resource specialist. His job duties included payroll, mail delivery, processing metals. He also had become an information technology specialist, which was a common transition in the Army. You see, as an IT soldier, he would have been trained as a computer system troubleshooter. No doubt he knew his way online, and no doubt he knew how to find ISIS online. But even, my friend, while he was in the military, he ran into some trouble. After his deployment, he had joined the Army Reserve. He continued to serve as an IT specialist until July 2020. But in 2015, he actually pled guilty to a drunk driving charge. Prosecutors, they are saying that he was driving impaired inside one of the Army's largest military installations. According to a charging document, in November 2014, he was found driving over the legal limit with an open container of alcohol. He pled guilty to a level 5 DWI charge in May 2015. There he was placed under probation, paid a fine, surrendered his driver's license, completed some community service, and participated in an alcohol rehab program. In 2005, he was charged with driving with an invalid license in Texas. 3 years earlier, he was charged with property theft misdemeanor. My friend, pay close attention. Here is a man who is not living a perfect life, and he turned to a life of terror. People who are living fulfilled lives, and we've said this before on this program, people who are living fulfilled lives are not those people who become mass shooters, are those people who become terrorists. Even in the midst of one of his divorces, he talks about all this financial pressure that he had. He says time is of essence. He said, I cannot afford the house payment. It's past due in the excess of $27,000. He said it's in danger of foreclosure if we delay settling the divorce. That's what he wrote to his attorney in January 2022. You see, my friend, here is a guy who had problems, in spite of having a good job. He had a gross salary of $120,000 a year. Even his second wife, this was when his second wife filed a motion for a temporary restraining order in 2020. So get this. Here is a troubled man, and he's given a push from ISIS, online recruitment, to go over to the dark side. He even went to Egypt, spent some time there. At the beginning of this investigation, there was also another situation that came up regarding this event on New Year's Day. There was a possible connection, investigators thought, to a car bombing in Las Vegas, again this past week on New Year's Day. That, too, my friend, was done by a military man who was still on active duty. And we're talking, my friend, about the Cybertruck bombing that happened outside the Trump International Hotel there in Las Vegas, again on New Year's Day. Now, this appears to be the suicide of a veteran who was struggling from PTSD and other issues. That's what the FBI said this past Friday. Police there identified Matthew Allen Livesberger, a 37-year-old active member of the United States Special Forces. He was the driver of that Cybertruck that exploded there in front of the hotel on Wednesday morning. The Las Vegas police said that the county coroner had determined that this same veteran had shot himself in the head. Now, information uncovered by investigators and from the Army indicated that this guy had PTSD. Family lives and personal grievances may have also contributed to him renting the car in Colorado, filling it up with explosives, and taking it to Las Vegas, where it exploded in front of the Trump Hotel. There was no evidence that this bombing on the same day, New Year's Day this past week, was connected to this terror attack in New Orleans that happened earlier the same day. There's no evidence at all that this was connected. Now, there were similarities. The vehicles were rented through the same service. Both perpetrators serving in the military, and both were staying at an Airbnb. However, the difference here is that this one in Las Vegas was not an ISIS type of attack. Rather, that the purpose was to call attention to the problems we have as a nation. You see, this guy was an experienced special officer. He knew that if he wanted to harm others, he would have done the bombing in a whole lot better way than he did that bombing. He would have used a higher level type of bombing. He did not use that, but a lower level in this one. So here we have two different events that mean two different things. Next week now, we're going to take the time and we're going to talk to you about the part of the police response and the police actions regarding this attack. Before we do that, though, let me say that boots on the ground cops there with this terror act on Bourbon Street performed with courage. They rushed to danger. Even two of their own were shot as they courageously confronted the gunman who had just mowed down innocent people in his pickup truck. So, my friend, there were some brave cops there. But did the cops do enough? You see, they had already been warned before that Bourbon Street was open to this kind of attack. Did they plan accordingly? We're going to talk all about that next week. But before we leave, I've got to say, if this story says anything, it says this: we must all do more to show our military our support for their sacrifice to protect our country. There are problems for our brave men and women of the military. Problems that we are not meeting as a nation. We are not showing them the support that they need. This is why there's such a large number of suicides in the military. The mental struggles among our military. And this is why people like Jabbar is a target for ISIS to brainwash. We must do more to help them. In fact, my friend, this might be a good time for you to go to PeacemakerNetwork.com, see how you too can help. Or contact any veteran organization and volunteer your help there, either financially or personally or both. Now, next week, when we do part 2, I'm going to talk to you about the question, could this tragedy have been avoided? Again, the police had been warned that Bourbon Street was a target for this type of attack. Did they do enough to prepare for it? Well, we're going to attempt to answer that next week in part 2. But until then, this is Charle Crimebuster here saying, be safe, be alert. For the life you save, it may be your very own.
You have been listening to Charle Crimebuster. You can find additional podcasts at charlecrimebuster.com. You can also support our first responders, military, and law enforcement communities at peacemakernetwork.com. Or subscribe to our YouTube channel using tag at Charle Crimebuster. Even visit our Facebook page, facebook.com/Charle Crimebuster. Or if you would like to make suggestions for future podcasts, please send your ideas to charlecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charlecrimebuster@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you will join us next week for another exciting crime story with Charle Crimebuster.